This will be my first unboxing video. I hear it's pretty popular with the Utes. Anyhow, all of this is going on here. Oh yeah. What do you think? I've got high strength metal fender flares to get rid of the plastic ones that are already screwed up, a front bumper, a rear bumper, license plate relocation kit because I've gotten rid of the spare tire on the back, moves it to the middle of the tailgate, hood latch kit, and running boards with steps that my wife will appreciate. Now it's time to get to work. Forgot the winch. I can't believe I forgot the winch. By the time the JK Wrangler ceased production with the 2017 model, Jeep had made over 2 million of them. That's a lot of Jeeps. And even with the 3-inch lift, my 4-door JK was pretty ordinary. Not to mention, after 9 years, the plastic bumpers and flares are looking a little bit the worse for wear. You can't really see it here, but I've got a fender flare that's half torn loose from the Jeep because it got caught on a limb or something. And the plastic bumper up front is wrinkled on the right side from a little bump up on the trails. I punched it out, but the edges of the bumper are just hollow plastic and don't hold up to much. Time to rip these bad boys off and replace them with something made from steel. So if we're going to get started, we might as well start at the front. Got to get this old plastic bumper off the Jeep that's already been wadded up a little bit, and I've punched it out as best as I can, but I'll be glad to get rid of it. First of all, we got to get rid of the super rugged plastic skid plate, as well as this little aerodynamic piece up top. The skid plate, if you want to call it that, isn't even held on with any bolts. There are just a few plastic push pins holding it in place. With the skid plate out of the way, you have access to unplug the fog lights. And then the filler plate behind the bumper has just 2 push pins as well. But they're in recessed divots, and dang if they aren't hard to get off. Finally, you dirty dog. This is trash. After that, there are just 8 bolts holding the bumper to the frame. The wiring for the fog lights is attached to the back side of the bumper, so I just cut the clips to release the wiring loom. And we're done. Okay, these fenders were really no big deal. The hardest part for me was getting my fat fingers up in here to unhook the cable for the turn signal. After that, it's 5 10mm bolts, a couple of the plastic retainer trees, and the fender just pops right on out. There you go. The rear fender flares are even easier. There's no turn signal light to deal with and only 4 or 5 little push pins. No bolts at all. So we just take in here and start ripping it off. It's kind of therapeutic. Then we just pull the rest of these retainers out and clean everything up. The running boards are even easier to get off. There's just 3 metric bolts underneath securing them to the underside of the Jeep. Then they just slide right off. And finally, I turn my attention to the brackets securing the plastic rear bumper to the Jeep frame. Pretty lightweight. Anyhow, that's the last of the plastic bumpers. All I need to do now is get rid of some of these brackets that mounted it up, the receiver hitch, and I'll be good to go and start putting things back on. After the bumper was out of the way, I could remove the tow hook as well as the receiver hitch, which bolts up to this cross member. The tow hitch looks pretty beefy, and for a bit, I thought about cutting the one out of the new steel rear bumper to try to keep this one. But after doing a bit of research, I realized the receiver hitch on the EAG steel bumper is rated for 5,000 pounds, and the 4-door Wrangler Unlimited is only rated for 3,500 towing pounds. So I yanked it. Getting the Jeep naked only took me a couple of hours, and that's with me trying to film everything, which always adds time, an annoying amount of time. So now it's time to start putting stuff back on. I'll start with the EAG steel front bumper. It's heavy. So here is the back side of the bumper, and I've got just a little bit of work to do before we can put it onto the Jeep. I looked everywhere and cannot find the instructions, but it doesn't seem too difficult. I know that the bumper uses the original fog lights, so I've already yanked them out of the old front bumper. And make sure that the adjuster goes to the bottom. So it's giving me new hardware, and they'll just drop right in here. EAG isn't exactly one of the most recognizable names when it comes to 4x4 gear. Honestly, I'd never heard of it until I found it on Amazon, but it seems well made. The steel is all 5/32 of an inch thick, and the tubing is all 2 inches in diameter with a wall thickness of 120 thousandths of an inch. That helps make the built-in winch plate capable of handling a 12,000 pound winch. Here, you can see some of the studs that mount the bumper to the Jeep's frame. Those make it easy to hang the bumper in place until you can get it properly bolted up. And then the fog lights plug right back in. Now, if I have one complaint here, the welding quality on some of the tubing isn't quite the best. No amount of black crinkle powder coat is going to cover that sin, but really, it's not that big of a deal. By the way, if you like any of the components I chose, I'll put links to where you can find them yourself in the description below. Up to you. Out back, I'm also installing an EAG bumper, and it's also manufactured from 5/32 inch plate steel and uses these brackets inside the frame to mount up to the bumper. This joker is heavy, and there are no studs like the front bumper to let it hang on, so I cheated and got my dad to help me hold it in place until I got a couple of bolts in. There are also a couple of big bolts that go right behind the receiver hitch and mount directly to the steel cross member where the original receiver hitch bolted up. And the recovery D-rings aren't just there for decoration. They're rated for 4 3/4 tons, just like the two up front. Okay, now I just add my hitch and the rear bumper is done. Nice. The fender flares are from Rough Country, and I really like these because they have a piece of tubing along here, so it gives it a finished edge versus a lot of the flat, unfinished plastic ones you see. And I took a bit of a risk because these are Rough Country, and the front and rear bumpers are both from EAG, but the powder coating matches up pretty well. Now these will just bolt right up in the holes where the old fenders went. I like the look of the flat fenders, and since they're made from steel, they are certainly a lot more durable than the stock fenders. But they open up the wheel well so much that they actually make the 33 inch by 1250 tires I have on there now look small. So, Rough Country's front fenders went on piece of cake, and the rears are also pretty simple, but there is one little hitch. The sheet metal on the Jeep right here gets where you can't reach the backside of the bolt for more metal here and here. So to take care of that, we're going to install some nut certs, and Rough Country has even given us a cool little installation tool we're going to use to do that with. If you're familiar with thread certs, or threaded inserts as they're more properly called, then you probably already know they are usually installed with a tool that looks like a giant set of pliers. This tool is simpler and is essentially a couple of threaded studs and nuts. Thread the nut cert onto one end, jam it into the appropriate hole in the Jeep, and then tighten the nut on the backside until it stops. Now you have an easy, convenient way to tighten a bolt into a hole where you can't reach the backside. And here we go. Like the new fender flares, the Nerf bars are from Rough Country. I stuck with the same brand, mostly because since the flares and the Nerf bar are all close together and visible down the side of the Jeep, I wanted the black powder coat to match. But as you can see, the Nerf bars are more of a flat black, and the flares actually match the EAG bumpers better than the Nerf bar. Oh well, once it all gets muddy, it won't matter anyway. You will notice these Nerf bars have lowered steps to make it easier to get into and out of the Jeep. This makes it a poor choice if you're looking for a set of rock sliders, but when I go off-road here in the South, most of my time is in the mud anyway. Plus, it makes it easier for my wife to get in the Jeep. And you know what they say, happy wife, happy life. Anyhow, the new Nerf bars do require that you drill some holes in the pinch welds for extra support. All that's required is to mount up the Nerf bars, mark the position of the holes against the Jeep, and drill them out with a 1/4-inch bit. The main brackets are slotted so that the Nerf bar can be moved in or out from the side of the Jeep. So for final assembly, I loosely bolted up the 3 main bolts underneath, then installed the bolts against the pinch weld to pull the Nerf bar tight to the body, and finally I went back and torqued up the big bolts still on the bottom. Those were the big changes, but I also had a few more small touches I wanted to add. No matter how often I applied plastic restorer, the original hood latches were going gray from UV exposure and were generally looking pretty grimy. So I replaced them with a pair of all-metal adjustable hood latches. Okay, so far so good. Everything bolted up like it needed to. It all seems to work together. The only thing I'm really unhappy with right now is there's no way to get the original inner fenders to bolt up nice and tight and snug anymore because too much of it just mounted to the original fender flare. There's no way I want to leave this area up on the firewall open because once mud gets up in there, I'll never get it clean again, and there's too much electronics exposed. So if you cut the inner fender back to fit, it lacks enough mounting points and just flops around. Not acceptable. But fortunately, I think I know a solution. I went back on the internet and ordered a set of steel inner fenders from Rough Country. I stuck with Rough Country because I figured it's the best way to ensure that the inner fenders would fit with my flares. Anyhow, this is the setup for the front. They come in 3 sections, and the centerpieces include a cutout with the Rough Country logo and a panel to go behind it. The panel comes in silver, but I painted mine red to match the Jeep. If you don't want the logo to show up, you can just paint the panel black. Then I just assembled the 3 sections and bolted it into the Jeep. All the hardware necessary for the install is provided, and honestly, the fit and finish is really pretty excellent. I did have to drill 1 hole in the front of the Jeep to get the inner fender secured, but that was a piece of cake. Likewise, the rear inner fenders also come in 3 pieces. But to get it into the Jeep's rear wheel well, you have to install it in sections. In my opinion, the rear inner fender isn't as necessary as the front, but I decided to install it for a consistent look behind all 4 wheels. And once again, 1 hole has to be drilled to fully secure the inner fender. The last thing on my to-do list was to relocate the license plate to the center of the tailgate. I'm not running a spare tire right now, so I just think this helps the rear of the Jeep look more balanced. Originally, I had planned to use a kit from Poison Spider. You may have noticed it when I laid out all the components at the start of the video, but to be honest, I didn't like the giant Poison Spider logo cut out in the license plate frame. So I looked for something a little less flashy. What I found on Amazon is a no-name brand, but it's definitely more subtle. Now that may sound silly considering the giant red RC and the inner fenders, but hey, I like what I like. After removing the original license plate frame on the left-hand side of the Jeep and popping in a delete plate, I moved on to the installation. For this particular plate, the rear vent has to go. Just squeeze it in on the top and the bottom and it pops right out. By the way, I've already removed the rear tire carrier a long time ago. It comes off with just a few bolts and unplugging some wiring. One problem I ran into is the kit I used came with absolutely pathetic instructions. Bolting it up was relatively straightforward, but the wiring can be an issue. So I used a combo of videos I found online for similar kits for how to route the wiring. I'll put a link to one I used in the description for this video. Anyhow, the wire extensions this kit provided were inexplicably all the same color. So, after being careful to label each one, there's a power and ground for both the third brake light and for the license plate illumination. I routed them through the vent hole in the tailgate and to the wiring loom on the inside. To get the license plate illumination light wired, I spliced it into this white wire with a gray stripe on the tailgate. And for a ground, I did the same thing with the black wire. Then, inside the Jeep, I cut the white and gray wire again and spliced it into the wire loom going into the brake light on that side. Specifically, I teed it into a white wire with a violet stripe. This powers the license plate light. And then you do approximately the same thing over again to get the third brake light to work. As you can see, now I've got both the license plate illumination and a third brake light, keeping me nice and legal. Admittedly, this video is about looks more than performance. But the fender flares do open up the wheel wells, and someday I'd like to install some stronger axles and increase the tire size from 35s to 37s. Still, I'm loving the new look, and I didn't have to break the bank to get it. Hey, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please check out the others I have working on my project.